All right, sellers, this one is for you, and it might be a little too direct. It might feel a little harsh, and it might be things that you don't want to hear. But I'd rather it come from me and you are prepared for when you decide to sell your house than hearing all of this information from your real estate agent if you're not working with me, from like on the spot and you're kind of in panic and you have some pressure on you because perhaps you're under contract or you're trying to list very quickly and then you have a different type of pressure on you. So I want to go over this and consider yourself warned. All right. So what we're going to talk about is the inspection report. I want to discuss why you shouldn't be offended by the inspection report, how to prepare for the inspection report, and what to do if you still choose to neglect things on the inspection report, and how that trajectory pans out for you and possibly your next real estate agent if you decide not to continue working with the original person. So let me start with the fact that every single house, including new construction, will have an inspection report, which means it could be 10 pages or it could be 75 pages. A house is man-made. And when you have a resale house, a house is taken care of by people. So nothing is going to be perfect. And what I find endearing about this is that we have two types of sellers in this world. We have the perfectionist and we have the denialist. The perfectionist is the person who is very in tune with their house. They are tinkering, fixing, preventing, enhancing, like they're doing everything in their power to make sure that the house is always ready. It's always top notch. They want to live in a place where everything is cohesive. The denialist, on the other hand, is the person who sweeps everything under the rug. They don't want to pay or possibly can't pay for repairs. They just ignore it. They abandon it. And all of those things add up with time, and you are looking at a much larger bill down the road. Now, the reason why I think that sellers should not be offended by the inspection report is because the inspection report is a direct reflection of how you chose to keep up and maintain the house during your time as a homeowner. So if you're the perfectionist, please don't be offended when you still find things on your inspection report. It's almost impossible to have a perfectly clean inspection report. But if you're a perfectionist, I do think that their ego is bruised a tiny bit because they expect there to be nothing, because they know that house through and through, because they have receipts for everything, because they know that everything is working, and they even prepared for the inspection to make sure that nothing was going to be on there. And it's just not possible, right? So, again, it's very endearing, and it does, I will say, the perfectionist inspection report is very clean. So the denialist, on the other hand, their ego is bruised because it's the mirror that they don't want to look in. It's the choices that they made over all of those years of homeownership to just abandon their house. They didn't have it corrected after a minor flood, a big flood, after water was spilled on the floor and it ate up the baseboards, whatever it is. And all of those little decisions along the way that are like, whatever, those seep into that seller's attitude towards the buyer. And I think that there truly are a wide variety of denialists. You have the investor who had a remodel. Perhaps it wasn't the best remodel, and perhaps it was like 3 years ago. And the investor still thinks that everything that was done in that remodel should be showing up today as it was 3 years ago. Like the house has been lived in, the house has been vacant, the house was occupied by tenants. And I know this is a tiny bit of a tangent, but if you aren't aware, tenants don't want to be blamed for anything. They're not going to always tell you, as the landlord, what's wrong with your house. They're too scared. What if they did something and now they're responsible? They have to pay for it. What if they didn't do something and they're held responsible and they have to pay for it? They would rather ignore it, and they're not going to tell you, which is why no matter the profile of the tenant, the landlord needs to have checks on the house, needs to check in with the tenant, and leave that line of communication open if you ever plan on selling the house after it's been rented out, because it is very common for a homeowner to walk into this house that they had remodeled and had tenants in there. And because they never heard from the tenants for X amount of years, they just assume the house is fine. Well, that's not quite true. So the denialist is the person who kind of blames everyone else, which actually leads me to the inspector. The perfectionist is the type of person who thanks the inspector. They understand that the inspector's job is to go in and take a look at the house because the buyer hired the inspector essentially to find all the flaws, because the buyer doesn't know the seller. The buyer has no idea how the seller took care of the home, maintained the home. Did they keep up with repairs? Did they not? And we can't ask the seller directly, hey, can I have all of your receipts ever for any and all repairs and corrections and replacements of the entire house? Most people don't have that. The perfectionist does have that book, but most people don't have that stuff. So that's what the inspector does. The buyer is hiring the inspector to go in and tell the buyer all of the things that are wrong on the house. The caveat here is that the inspector has to cover their own butt and make sure that they call everything out so that the inspection report has everything and nobody can come back and say, hey, Mr. Inspector, you didn't call this out. And now the inspector's in trouble. So that's kind of the reason, in my opinion, why sellers shouldn't be offended by the inspection report. You're in charge. You are completely in charge of how you want that inspection report to show up. And if you chose not to take care of anything, then that's what's going to show up. And if you take very good care of your house, that's also what's going to show up. And just because there's things on the inspection report for the perfectionist, I think when the perfectionist hears from the inspector, like, this is a really clean house, that's kind of all that the perfectionist wants to hear. And I appreciate that. I'm somebody who takes pride in my home, and I always want it to be clean and look nice and organized. And, that's just for myself. And so that's kind of what the perfectionist is doing. And people, buyers, can feel that thought or maybe I should say buyers share that sentiment of a perfectionist homeowner versus of a denialist homeowner. Like, you can walk in as a buyer, you will know immediately if this house is cared for, if it's not. It's a black and white question. The answer is yes or no. And buyers know immediately. So sellers, how do you prevent your ego being bruised from the inspection report? How do you prepare yourself emotionally for what you will find on the inspection report? I would say, number one, you have to start detaching from the house. For a seller, I call it a house. And for buyers, I call it a home, because a house is a noun. It's a thing. It's something that you buy and you trade. A home is irreplaceable. A home is the feeling that a buyer is trying to achieve by looking at a whole bunch of houses. Which house can I make my home? You see the difference? So it's really important that you as the seller understand, again, you're selling a feeling, you're selling an emotion. And the quicker you can detach from your house, the quicker you will understand its value. And why do I say that? Because we're not selling memories. We're not selling your life experiences in a portfolio to somebody. We're selling a dwelling that needs to be a clean slate, so somebody else can come in and make that their home and create their memories with their family. Now, if it's a family selling to a family, I think that there is a lot of, again, shared sentiment between those two, because it's really easy for a family to walk in and they appreciate that you have a family. And that works. But it also doesn't work if the house is in complete disarray and it feels gross and yucky in there. And that feeling translates to the inspection report, which is why I'm even giving all of these examples. So having a pre-listing inspection, which means having an inspection before you decide to list your house, whether you do anything about it or not, I guess that's up to you. I would say that does matter. But if you receive the inspection report before you go live to the public, you are going to know as the seller everything that's wrong with your house, everything that will come up in the buyer's inspection report, and everything that a buyer could possibly ask you to fix, credit, replace, right? And that is the entire goal. It kind of saves your ego a little bit to spend the money, which I know you don't want to spend the money. It's like, oh, I'll just get it. I'll just see what happens when the buyer has their inspection. You know, the inspector isn't out to get you as the seller. And this is part of the denialist character traits that I've noticed throughout this 2026 season for some reason. Sellers have been so offended and they come very quickly to their own defense to explain why something the way it is or why the inspector's wrong. Now, let me give you some really big examples. If there is moisture found in the house or if there is mold found in the house, those aren't going to fly. The buyer wants those tested and fixed. Every buyer is going to want those tested and fixed. And if they don't want those tested and fixed, they are going to have a number in mind that makes them feel comfortable for the Pandora's box of opening the wall to check the moisture or of how much mitigation needs to be done for any amount of mold that's found in the house. That's the only way to solve it. Either the seller takes it upon themselves to have the inspection, the mold inspection, or somebody come over to open the wall and see what's going on with moisture, or you wait for the buyer to just request some giant number that feels totally out of alignment. Like, you are so in control of this situation as a seller, and so many sellers kind of stab themselves in the foot when they really, it's like you have so much control as the seller. You really do. And I wish people would realize this. So the other thing is that you don't want to ignore things. And for the denialist who's already been doing years of ignoring to their home, it's really hard to get on board when you see the inspection report and they feel personally attacked. Again, this is not a personal attack to you as a person, but I understand why you are offended because you chose, this is again, the mirror you didn't want to look in. And now everything's coming up. Now you're going to have bigger bills than if you took care of it 5 years ago. Now you're going to have somebody who is putting you, a fire under your butt saying, hey, are you going to take care of this? Are you going to give me a credit or am I walking? It doesn't, things don't just go away. They have to be cared for. Now, typically on an inspection report for the perfectionist, you don't see a whole lot of things. And the perfectionist wants to continue correcting the items that are on the inspection report. They want to go over to the house, fix as much as they can within their control. And perhaps they're calling their friends who are plumbers and electricians and all of those things to understand, like, hey, can you look at the inspection report? Does this need to be done, or did the inspector just blow it out of proportion? Which inspectors I find have been blowing things out of proportion. I'm not saying they're all correct. I'm just saying that they're not out to personally attack you. That is how you prevent your ego from being bruised and perhaps a little bit humiliated in front of the buyer. Number 3, what happens if you as a seller choose not to correct anything on the inspection report? So let's pick up from the example where we left off. We find mold and we find moisture in the unit, in the home. Well, the buyer's going to ask the seller to fix it. You as a seller say, I'm not going to. I'm going to give you a minimal amount of money. You can take it and you can do what you want with it. Well, the buyer isn't going to feel like that is a sufficient amount of funds to fix the problem because nobody, the buyer, the seller, and neither real estate agent have any idea what it cost. The inspection might cost $500. I don't know. And the buyer cannot open a wall to discover the moisture behind the wall without having to repair it. That really is on the seller. That's not something that a buyer should be doing. So now what? The seller gets mad at the real estate agent because the real estate agent knows that if the seller doesn't either offer more money to the current buyer or fix what the buyer is asking, the seller's canceling. If you as the seller decide that you don't want to have any tests done, you don't want to fix anything from the inspection report that you've now seen, and you take it personally and feel like, oh, who's going to buy this? What am I supposed to do with this asset that I can't sell? Well, you can sell. This goes back to being in control. It just takes education on the property. It takes a little bit of time, and it takes a little bit of money to get your place back up to where it needs to be sold. So the downfall about this entire situation is that you as the seller now have to disclose everything that's on that inspection report. If the buyer cancels and you have mold and moisture in your house that you're trying to sell, you have to put that in the seller disclosure. And your real estate agent has to be honest and ethical and explain the situation, whether you want them to or not. And I think that's the hard part. We have, as a real estate agent, an ethical moral code that we have to follow. We also have a fiduciary relationship that we have to follow with our client. Well, the client feels betrayed if I am now forced by my ethical code of conduct to tell people what was found in the inspection report. So I'll give you two examples. If I were representing the seller on a house that had mold and moisture, the buyer canceled, the seller wanted to move forward with keeping it on the market, I, as the real estate agent, need to write an email and explain this is what needs to be done in order for the house to be up to par, because we now have to disclose everything. The seller gets mad at me and says that I'm betraying them. Well, I'm not betraying you. I have to do what I have to do. So let's just say we keep it on the market. Buyer's agent number one calls. Hey, I saw that this house fell out of contract. I'm curious what happened. My unethical answer is, oh, the buyer just asked for too many repairs on the report. The seller said no, the buyer walked. Technically, that's true. However, it's not ethically true. But we're not talking about like a GFCI unit, okay, that needs to be swapped out in the bathroom. That is not what we're talking about. We are talking about something that is a health issue, right? Just like if it were an electrical box and it's from the 70s and it's got stripped wires and double breakers and everything's too much for what it needs to be and the whole thing needs to be updated. If that were the case, I'd have to disclose that. So buyer number two's agent calls. Hey, Lauren, I just was curious. I saw that XYZ fell out of contract. Can you tell me why and what's going on with it? Well, we had a buyer. They asked for a lot of money or a lot of repairs. The seller didn't feel like it was worth what they were asking. And the seller, they chose not to fix anything. So the buyer canceled. Well, what was on the inspection report that caused them to cancel? That's what the buyer's agent would say. I have to explain that it's mold. Well, there was mold found, there was some moisture found, whatever, the garbage disposal doesn't work, whatever it is, right? I have to disclose that. I guess you can leave it, and this is totally up to you, and this is a judgment call if you want to leave it vague, but that next inspection report is going to have the same thing. They're going to have the same thing. So you can't really lie about it, because if you go back and that buyer number two comes along and they say, did you know about this? I have proof I knew about it. I can't hide that I knew what was in the inspection report because I'm in possession of the inspection report. It was sent to me. I sent it to the seller. I turned it into my office. There's no getting around it, which is why you can't lie, right? And you're not really asking your seller for permission. Hey, can I tell them that there's mold in the house? No, that's not the question that you ask. It's a statement. Seller, I have to now disclose this. So if you want to take care of it, then we can say there was mold found, but it was remediated. Fine, cool, done. Here's the receipts. This is what makes people feel better. You can talk to whoever you want. All of the vendors are there for you to call. Easy. But sweeping it under the rug or switching real estate agents is not going to prevent what will be on that next inspection report for that next buyer. Now, if you choose to switch real estate agents and you choose not to tell them of these major health issues or major safety issues, if it's the electrical box, for example, you're setting them up to be in a really bad place. And that is very, very unfair to do. Changing real estate agents doesn't remove the proof, the knowledge. It just means you're going to be in that same position again. And I'm not saying that you need to stay with the first contract, but what I have been seeing, and this has happened to me twice in the last 2 weeks, is that the buyer cancels and the seller then reduces the price way more than they offered the buyer. So if for example, if the seller offers the buyer, here, I'll give you $2,000, but I'm not going any less than that, and then it stays on the market and drops $5,000, what? Why didn't you just give the buyer the $5,000? Or maybe a little bit bigger of amount. If the buyer wanted $12,000 off, why did you go reduce it $15,000? You could have just given that to the buyer and saved $3,000, continued on with the contract and been closed in a week or two. Like, I just don't understand why people would do that. It doesn't make sense. And that's why I want this video to hopefully reach a lot of people so that you can understand the trajectory of what happens. If you choose not to fix anything on the inspection report, whether you get a new agent or you stick with the same agent, you still have more days on market. So are you really going to not move forward with the current buyer over $3,000? I'm not saying it's not a lot of money. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you go reduce it $5,000, the next buyer comes in less than asking price. Now they're going to see the inspection report. They're going to ask you for a whole bunch of more money or repairs. Now you're way below the number that you originally wanted. So why not just take care of it up front? These are the things that I want you guys to think about. And it's the chain of events. And it's so easy to get ahead of this, to make sure that the product, you are selling an emotion, but you're not selling your memories. You are selling a product. Your house is a dwelling. It is a property. It is a physical structure that somebody is going to buy. You have to detach from it. And you can't take it personally when you see things on the inspection report. Again, I know it's blunt, but it's your choice. All of this is in your hands as the seller about how easy it is to put out a proper product. So easy. It's so easy. If you keep up with it over time, it's not going to be a giant bill at the end. So I hope that this was insightful. I gave a couple of examples that I think would be helpful for people to understand. Those are common things that you would see on an inspection report. So if you found this helpful, please like the video, leave a comment, subscribe, and send it to a friend who's thinking about selling. If you need a real estate agent that's not in Scottsdale and not in Miami, I'm happy to put you in touch with a hidden equity agent who has already been vetted and is ready to go in your city.